Hello, this is Laura Lyons with SonarMed, and I want to welcome you to the NICU clinical training for the SonarMed Airwave. You're going to be watching Module 1, an overview of the Airwave. We're going to talk about why you would use the Airwave, how it works, and the powerful information that comes from the monitor. We'll also go over the intended use of the monitor, and then give you a brief overview, and then also how do you transport using the monitor. So let's get started.
I'm excited to introduce the SonarMed Airwave monitoring system for neonatal patients. The monitor is designed using acoustic reflectometry, essentially sound waves that are sent down the endotracheal tube into the fifth generation of the lung and then measuring the echoes coming back. That's important because that technology allows us to measure the movement of the endotracheal tube tip, which is indicated in this part of the screen. As the tip migrates towards the carina or distally, you can see that a downward arrow will show, as well as the corresponding degree of movement from your baseline or your most optimum endotracheal tube location. If the tube starts to migrate towards extubation or out, you'll see a corresponding upward arrow and a degree of movement out of the patient. I can rebalance that without using a chest x-ray and exposing the patient to additional radiation by simply centering back to my original baseline by looking at the monitor itself. The second thing that the monitoring system does is it picks up occlusions within the endotracheal tube. It'll show the degree of occlusion as well as the location, and there's a corresponding scale to the endotracheal tube. This assists the nurse or the respiratory therapist in suctioning so they know exactly where to suction, and this will also indicate when they've appropriately cleared the occlusion. Oftentimes today when we suction a patient, we don't know if we've totally gotten the occlusion out or not, but because this device allows you to see with sound, you have a more accurate representation of just what's going on inside the inner lumen of your endotracheal tube. Because we're using acoustic reflectometry and the microphones and speaker that is in this system allows us to also hear the breath sounds of your patient in a more accurate way by just picking it up directly within the endotracheal tube. So the SonarMed Airwave monitoring system allows you to accurately measure the location of the endotracheal tube in your patient. It gives you the ability to pick up occlusions that may be building within the endotracheal tube, and it allows you to hear breath sounds by using the sensor that's connected to the endotracheal tube itself. These 3 points of information will allow you to better assess the care of your patient at the bedside.
So as you heard in the video, we use a technology called acoustic reflectometry. And we're sending sound and we're analyzing echoes. And I like to think about it like I would a submarine. I'm in my submarine and I go ping and I know what's out there. I know how big the submarine is that's in the distance. I know how quickly it's coming toward me. Or you might think of it as a bat. Bat flies around blindly, right? Because they send out these acoustic signals and they know what's around them. We use the timing and we use the strength and we use the cross-sectional area of those echoes to get this information. We connect this sensor directly to the endotracheal tube. And as you heard in the video, we have microphones and a speaker in there, so you actually can hear the breath sounds with it as well. Most everyone will ask us a little bit about the sensor itself and how large it is and how much dead space there is. The dead space is very minimal. It's 0.45 cc's if you connect it with your Y inline suction. And it actually weighs less than ½ an ounce. Once you see it on the patient and in line, you will see that the sensor essentially just sort of disappears into the ventilator circuit, and you will support the sensor the way you would support the ventilator circuit. So in the video you heard about what it does, and I guess let's talk a minute about why would you want this information. So if you're looking at the passageway size, or actually the diameter, so I like to think of passageway size as how big is the anatomical structure around the tip of the tube. What does that mean? I intubate my baby, I want to be in the trachea, I'm going to see the diameter of the trachea. But if I were to go into a bronchus, I'll see a smaller diameter of a bronchus. Or should I be in esophagus, I would see that as well. That information obviously is powerful because we want the tube in the trachea. We don't want to be in the bronchus, right? And also can help you to know if something is going on, even if the tube hasn't moved or isn't wasn't advanced into the bronchus, but if you have swelling or stenosis, you'll start to see those things as well. Secondly, we talked about tube obstructions and being able to know where the obstruction is in the tube, whether that's secretions in the tube or something occluding it from the outside. That is really powerful. We'll talk more about how that'll help you in your clinical practice. And then also this idea that we can see the tip of the tube and how much it moves, and that's how much it moves from where we started from. This information is continuous, real time, and it's information we haven't had this before as respiratory therapists. It's very easy to understand and very easy to trust. I already saw a picture of the monitor, but here's another one. It shows a sensor connected, and actually that's an adult sensor connected and a neonatal sensor that's in front of the monitor. And this monitor would show that there's been 4 millimeters of upward movement towards the cord since we started monitoring, and that we have an obstruction, pretty high up in the tube. So we talked about passageway size, or again, the diameter. I like to think about this as the diameter right around the tip of the endotracheal tube. You're going to see that in millimeters and tenths of a millimeter, and you get what we call a current and a baseline value. This current and baseline value, our baseline is where we started, current is where we are now. So you can tell if you had swelling to begin with, if your swelling has abated, and all kinds of information there. And again, if you're in the esophagus or in the bronchus, you will see that because you're going to have the diameter displayed. Now here we go with tube obstructions. So this is really important when it comes to knowing how clean the endotracheal tube is. And as you know, it doesn't take much with these little bitty endotracheal tubes for there to be an occlusion. So we show both the location of the occlusion in the tube or on the outside of the tube if it's kinked, and we show the percentage of that occlusion at the spot it's occluded. Okay? And again, kinks, secretions, anything causing those occlusions is what we're going to see. Now, why that's powerful for you is it really is going to assist you with your secretion management. If I know there's secretions in my tube, I know when to suction, I know when not to suction, and I know if I've suctioned effectively. Powerful information. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the tube tip movement. You saw in the video that as the tip of the tube moves, we see it on the monitor. And again, we're looking at movement at the tip and not movement at the lip. Okay, so we have a baseline position that we set when we start monitoring. And then we're going to show the direction and the distance the tip of the tube has moved. You see the reference point on the right, which is about the 5th or 6th generation of the Airwaves. And it will show us then how much we've moved from our baseline position. This information is powerful because I know if I'm in a safe spot in the trachea. I know then if I'm moving the baby, such as kangaroo care or repositioning the baby, that the tip of the tube is in the right place before I start, and the tip of the tube stays in that safe zone throughout the care of the baby. And also because we have the microphones, you can hear the breath sounds of the patient. So why do we use the Sonarmit Airwave? Who is it intended to be used on and how? First of all, this is an adjunctive monitor. It's not a diagnostic system. It's meant to be used in addition to your clinical practice. One more monitor to help you gain valuable information to better care for your baby. It does give you that continuous information on both the placement. It assists you knowing obstructions and movement and to be able to hear the breath sounds. And you're going to use it on the neonatal size endotracheal tubes, basically 2.5 to 3.5. So let's talk a little bit about all the buttons and ports and everything that you see on the monitor. So first, here are your ports. This is where you plug the monitor in. Here's where you would plug in the sensor. And then this is where we do software upgrades or any kind of downloads. And on the front of the monitor, we've got our buttons. All right, most important button is the on-off down at the bottom right. And what we all like to think of as our most powerful button, the alarm silence, is up right by where it says SonarMed. Then you have this round circle of buttons with they're navigation buttons. I like to think of them almost like a mouse. Up, down, right, left. Center is your enter button. So center is enter, and it's like clicking on your mouse. And then finally you have these three oval buttons, and they correspond to what's on the screen, and that's going to change from screen to screen depending on what you're looking at. We already talked a little bit about plugging the sensor in, and that's what that's showing there. So next, if you transport a patient with a monitor, which is important to do because we know that, it's a difficult time transporting any patient through the hospital who's ventilated, and accidents can occur. So disconnect the power. You've got a battery that lasts you a couple hours charged, and you'll have it plugged in at the bedside, so it'll be charged. Another important thing to know is that the sensor actually has a 15mm connector on the end. That's where you're going to have your Y for your suction. But if you needed to bag, of course you can always bag through your Y section, but you also can bag directly on the end of the Airwave sensor. It's also important to know that it is not MRI compatible, and whereas it's great to use the monitor as you're going to the MRI, once you get there and before you bring the patient in the room, you're going to want to disconnect it. And then connect back up afterwards and transport back to the unit. If I was with you in person, I would ask you this question: how do you think the monitor can help you in your practice? We'd love to have you share with us your thoughts and your ideas, and you can do that by going to our website, which is www.sonarmed.com, and go to contact us on the top right, and you can just give us your information and share with us what you've learned, or even ask any questions. So thanks so much for listening to this, and we'll hope to see you back soon for the other modules.